Then the king of Assyria carried Israel away captive to Assyria, and put them in Halah, and by the Habor, the river of Gozan, and in the cities of the Medes, because they did not obey the voice of the Lord their God, but transgressed his covenant, and all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded. And they would neither hear nor do them. And in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. Then Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria at Lachish.
I have done wrong. Turn away from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will pay.
And the king of Assyria assessed Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. So Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord, and in the treasuries of the king's house. At that time Hezekiah stripped the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord, and from the pillars which Hezekiah king of Judah had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. Then the king of Assyria sent the Tartan, the Rabsaris, and the Rabshakeh from Lachish with a great army against Jerusalem to King Hezekiah. And they went up and came to Jerusalem. When they had come up, they went and stood by the aqueduct from the upper pool, which was on the highway to the fuller's field. And when they had called to the king Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, Shebna the scribe, and Joah, the son of Asaph, the recorder, came out to them. Then the Rabshakeh said to them,
Say now to Hezekiah, Thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, What confidence is this in which you trust? You speak of having plans and power for war, but they are mere words. And in whom do you trust that you rebel against me? Now look, you are trusting in the staff of this broken reed, Egypt, on which if a man leans, it will go into his hand and pierce it. So is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust in him. But if you say to me, We trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and whose altars Hezekiah has taken away, and said to Judah and Jerusalem, You shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? Now therefore, I urge you, give a pledge to my master, the king of Assyria, and I will give you 2,000 horses, if you are able on your part to put riders on them. How then will you repel one captain of the least of my master's servants, and put your trust in Egypt for chariots and horsemen? Have I now come up without the Lord against this place to destroy it? The Lord said to me, Go up against this land and destroy it.
Then Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, Shebna, and Joah said to the Rabshakeh,
Please speak to your servants in Aramaic, for we understand it. And do not speak to us in Hebrew in the hearing of the people who are on the wall.
Has my master sent me to your master and to you to speak these words, and not to the men who sit on the wall, who will eat and drink their own waste with you?
Then the Rabshakeh stood and called out with a loud voice in Hebrew,
Hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus says the king, Do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he shall not be able to deliver you from his hand. Nor let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord, saying, The Lord will surely deliver us. This city shall not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, Make peace with me by a present, and come out to me, and every one of you eat from his own vine, and every one from his own fig tree. and every one of you drink the waters of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive groves and honey, that you may live and not die. But do not listen to Hezekiah, lest he persuade you, saying, "The Lord will deliver us." Has any of the gods of the nations at all delivered its land from the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim and Hena and Igvah? Indeed, have they delivered Samaria from my hand? Who among all the gods of the lands have delivered their countries from my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem from my hand?
But the people held their peace, and answered him not a word. For the king's commandment was, "Do not answer him." Then Eliakim the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, Shebna the scribe, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder, came to Hezekiah with their clothes torn, and told him the words of the Rabshakeh. And so it was, when King Hezekiah heard it, that he tore his clothes, covered himself with sackcloth, and went into the house of the Lord. Then he sent Eliakim, who was over the household, Shebna the scribe, and the elders of the priests, covered with sackcloth, to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz.
Thus says Hezekiah, "This day is a day of trouble, and rebuke, and blasphemy. For the children have come to birth, but there is no strength to bring them forth. It may be that the Lord your God will hear all the words of the Rabshakeh, whom his master the king of Assyria has sent to reproach the living God, and will rebuke the words which the Lord your God has heard. Therefore, lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left."
So the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, and Isaiah said to them,
"Thus you shall say to your master, Thus says the Lord, Do not be afraid of the words which you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Surely I will send a spirit upon him, and he shall hear a rumor and return to his own land. And I will cause him to fall by the sword in his own land."
Then the Rabshakeh returned, and found the king of Assyria warring against Libnah, for he heard that he had departed from Lachish. And the king heard concerning Tirhakah, king of Ethiopia.
Look, he has come out to make war with you.
So he again sent messengers to Hezekiah.
Thus you shall speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, "Do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you, saying, Jerusalem shall not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Look, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all lands by utterly destroying them. And shall you be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered those whom my fathers have destroyed? Gozan and Haran and Rezeph and the people of Eden who were in Telasar. Where is the king of Hamath, the king of Arpad, and the king of the city of Sepharvaim, Hena, and Ivah?"
And Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers, and read it. And Hezekiah went up to the house of the Lord, and spread it before the Lord. Then Hezekiah prayed before the Lord.
O Lord God of Israel, the one who dwells between the cherubim, you are God. You alone of all the kingdoms of the earth, you have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see, and hear the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to reproach the living God. Truly, Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste the nations and their lands, and have cast their gods into the fire, for they were not gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they destroyed them. Now, therefore, O Lord our God, I pray, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you are the Lord God, you alone.
So there are a couple of ways in which we can fight the battles of life, which is what we're talking about today. We can do it our way, or we can do it God's way as we fight the battle. Remember when the children of Israel crossed the Jordan and God instructed Joshua how to fight, to win the battle in Jericho? It sounded stupid. It really did, from a human perspective. March around the wall 6 days and blow the trumpet. Blow the trumpet. Then it said that on the seventh day, they were all to walk around the walls of Jericho 7 times and blow the trumpet, which is the shofar. I'm going to try. All right, don't laugh, all right? Now, can you imagine hundreds and hundreds of those sounds as they blew the trumpet, the shofar, and then they were to shout out, "For the Lord has given us this city." You know, there's a sense, not encouraging us to do this, but I sense that we all get our trumpets and walk around our city, our township, and blow the trumpet and say, "This township belongs to the Lord, and we're taking it back." I'm not saying that we should do that, but it sounds good. But it sounds dumb when you think about it, walking around a city wall that was so wide that they could build houses on and have chariots going around there. I remember when I was in Israel back in 2011, I think it was, and our guide that we had, unfortunately, was not a Christian. He was a Jewish man, Israelite, but had gone to university to study as a tourist. And I said we were coming, I think it was coming back from the Dead Sea. And I said, I'd love to go to Jericho. And he said, "What do you want to go to Jericho for? It's useless." He said, those walls must have been made of paper mache or something. And I said, "Really?" I said, "They had chariots up there and houses that's made of paper mache." That was his literal words. Had no concept of the power of God, of what he can do, and brought those walls down. But interestingly, they were really obedient to God when they got to Jericho. But the problem is that sometimes we get ego problems. You ever notice that when we win a battle? We think, I can do this. I can do it. I think I might have said this to you once before, but when I was ministering in Bali, we had a wonderful service on this Sunday morning. God had just moved in powerfully upon us, and I felt that I spoke really, really well, really well. And I was driving home. Anne had to come back to Australia for one of her family funerals. And I'm driving along and I'm just as happy as anything. And I said, "God, I can do this without you." And immediately he said, "No, you can't. No, you can't." The problem what the children of Israel had at Ai, they thought they could do it themselves. Only a short distance away from Jericho where they'd seen the miraculous happen, they come to Ai and they get defeated. They get defeated. Why? Because they felt that the presence of God was with them all the time. But in those days it wasn't the case. They had to bring the presence of God with them. They had to know that. But what they had to do is inquire of the Lord first. "Lord, is this what you want us to do?" They didn't do that. And then they got defeated. How often do we go into our battles of life unprepared in God and then assume that he's with us? Now, I know that you'll say, "Oh, yeah, but the Spirit of God is he's within us." I know that. But sometimes that's just assuming that he's going to always do what we want him to do. That's not always the case, I can assure you. Folks, can I be bold enough to suggest that maybe that's where our problem lies sometimes from time to time? We assume that God's Spirit is with us and we forget to consult him on our journey into the battleground. And I know that only too well. I really do. Church, it's really important to say again, we continually need to understand that we're not on a playground, we're on a battleground. We've got to understand that. And I know that sometimes playgrounds have their little fights going on, but it's nothing compared to when you get on the battleground, which is where we are, really. The more I look at what is happening in our state of Victoria, the more I'm convinced that we are in a battleground. And church, do you know how to win a battle? It's simply divide and conquer. Divide and conquer. That's how the enemy works. And I'm going to go on record as saying this is how our government is working at the moment. They're dividing our country and it's going to be conquered. I don't care whether you vote yes or no. That's your prerogative, what you do. I'm not here to tell you. I know what I'm doing, but that's not for me to tell you. You need to discern before God what is right and what is not right, because whichever way it goes, we're going to divide. And that's the sadness of what's happening at the moment. So let's be aware that when we seek to worship Jesus, even with open expression like we talked about last Sunday, the enemy will try to pull you down and pull us down as a church. He will try to say, no, that's all emotional stuff. You don't need to go in that direction. It's all emotional. And he's winning the battle because he divides. I love that verse in Isaiah 59:19. When the enemy comes in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord will lift up a standard against him. When the enemy comes in like a flood, and some of us here today know what that means. When the enemy just comes in wave after wave after wave and you feel like you're going under. He says, I will build up a standard for you. What's the standard? I believe prayer is one of those standards. I believe worship is another one of those standards. And I believe one of the greatest standards that we have is love for one another. Love for one another. It's a commandment, but it's important. Always remember, no weapon formed against you is going to prosper. No weapon is going to prosper. And every tongue that rises up against you in judgment will be condemned. This is the heritage of the Lord. I don't know if you've experienced that when a tongue rises up against you in judgment. I've seen that. I've felt that. It hurts. But I've had to say, Lord, this is your deal, not mine. It's your deal. So it's of no surprise that after this great celebration of worship, that King Hezekiah announces that trouble has come knocking on the door. I mean serious trouble in the form of an enemy king. And he approaches Jerusalem and they strategically stop at the well outside of the wall of the city, just outside. Why the well? Well, it's simple, because that is always the source of supply, of life, if you like, of water. If you don't have water, you die. And so they stop the flow of water. So this enemy king hangs around the well for a while, and then he starts to trash talk Hezekiah. The enemy king knows that Hezekiah is only 25 years of age. He's read it. He's raw at this. You know, he's a greenie in terms of knowing what's going on and how to handle situations like this. And he's mocking Hezekiah. He's mocking his army. And then he goes a step too far. He starts to mock God. He starts to mock God. That was his biggest mistake. You can mock me, but don't mock my God, or be prepared to face the consequences if you do. Remember the story of Elijah at the top of Mount Carmel? They thought that their false god would bring down fire. The interesting part about it is one of the gods of Baal was the sun god. Now, you think if anything could come down and burn up the altar, it would be their sun god. But it didn't happen. They tried everything. They went into the midday, cutting themselves and yelling and screaming and dancing and doing a whole lot of things. Nothing happened. And then Elijah said, it's my turn. And Elijah got down on his knees and he prayed to Yahweh, to God. He said, God, you send the fire. You send the fire. And God did. You see, King Hezekiah is not sure whether the enemy king is going to simply trash the city or attack and kill everybody. He wasn't sure at this point of time. So at the end of all this trash talk, the enemy gives a letter, a threatening letter to King Hezekiah. And he gives it to one of his servants. He said, go and say this. You go and deliver this to King Hezekiah. I want him to see in writing just exactly what I'm going to do to him. You ever had one of those letters? I have. They're interesting letters, I tell you. I remember getting it one Sunday and I looked at it. I went, heck. So I took it to church with me on Sunday because I knew who it came from, even though it wasn't signed. I knew who it came from. And I held it up and I said, I got a letter from the devil this week. I'm serious, I did. I said, I know it comes from the devil because he never signs his letters. And I took it and tore it up, threw it out. And I went on and continued my sermon. Let me tell you, I'm not very strong when it comes to physical. As you can see, I'm only skin and bone. Nobody seems to be able to fatten me up. Anne's tried for 54 years. She's a failure at that. She's not listening to this, is she? Will? Okay. I need more eggs. That's what I need. Thank you, Des. I do. More eggs. I was just saying to Des before, we buy a dozen eggs every week because Anne loves eggs, and especially the fresh ones. And she took a half a dozen of them and gave them to one of our neighbours who does a lot of baking. She came back to Anne and she said, "These are the best eggs I've ever had for baking." So there you go. Keep these chooks a-going, Burrow. Keep those chooks a-going. They're great. But when it comes to the realm of the Spirit, I have a different physique, I can assure you. I'm stronger in God. I can't do it physically, but I tell you what, spiritually, I'm a monster when it comes to God, because I understand that greater is he that is within me than he that's in the world. Greater is he that is within me. And that gives me courage. It also gives me authority to move in God. And this is what Hezekiah was facing. So Hezekiah, this very young king who's never tasted a leadership challenge like this before, starts to feel this tremendous burden of being a leader, and feels at stage that his leadership and his well-being is under threat. He doesn't quite know what to do, because at 25, you don't have the experience, you don't have a lot of wisdom of what's going on. So he reads and he rereads this letter of threat. It eventually starts to crush him as a young leader, and he can't handle it any longer. Let me read the next text, 2 Kings 19, verse 14. And Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. And Hezekiah went up to the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord. Spread out what? The written letter. Literally, he spread the letter out before the Lord. He'd been carrying it around. He'd been reading it and reading it. He'd go to bed and he'd read it when he got up again, and every morning. And in a moment, with great humility, he says, "I'm finished. I cannot do it. I'm going to hand it over to God." Then he says, "Lord, this is what has been keeping me up all night. And I think about it all day long. And I can no longer handle the threat from this foreign king. I cannot handle it alone." That's where we need to go as well. I can't handle it alone. I've got to take it to the Lord. So he spreads it out before the Lord and he asks God for help. He literally put the letter on the altar, if you like, and he said, "God, deal with it." Question: what are you spreading out before the Lord these days? What is it that you are so worked up about, so worried about, or so keen to see something happen in our community or in our church, maybe personally, that you need literally to spread it out before God? I know personally I've been doing that over the last 2 years now, and I'm blessed to be able to say that I've seen progress. Not totally, but I'm honouring God in the midst of it, because it's the very thing that's been keeping me up at nights. Literally for years I've been praying a certain way for certain situations. But since looking at this biblical principle of spreading it out before the Lord, I've seen the hand of God work. Is there anything in your life so intense, so important, that you would do anything like this to make it happen? Last year, sitting in my son's work office, having lunch with him, and I said to him, because he was wrestling with a situation in his business, I simply said, "Son, spread it out for the Lord, and I'll do the same. Let's do it together." And God is showing him miracles. Has it finished? No, not yet, but it's moving in the right direction. Only this last Friday, a few days ago, I rang him and I said, "How's it going, mate?" He said, gave me a situation. I said, "Remember what I said 12 months ago? Spread it out before the Lord. Spread it out before the Lord. Let God help you through this, and he'll walk you through it," which is what he's doing now. In fact, both Anne and myself have done a similar thing for our daughter, which we've talked about, and we've seen great things happen. Church, God never took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego out of the furnace. What God did was he broke their chains. I'm glad you had that song this morning, "Break Every Chain," because sometimes we feel like we're chained up or chained to something and we can't move. God says, "I can break every chain. I can break it." And that's what he did for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He broke every chain that bound them up, and they walked out with the person with them who is what we understand to be Jesus himself. Walked out with them of the furnace, unbound, in freedom. What is it that you are struggling with today? Hezekiah prays a prayer that seems in some ways outrageous, and God intervenes and says to Hezekiah, "You will not have to fight. I will fight for you. You will not have to lift a finger to defeat this king who is coming against you." And then in chapter 19, verse 34, it says, "For I will defend this city to save it for my sake." This is my city. That's what God was saying. This is my city. I'll defend it. And I can imagine Hezekiah and his youth saying, "Yeah, that sounds good to me. Lord, I'll go and play on my tablet, my computer, and play a few games while you're doing it all." No. We still have a part to play in what God is doing. Look at what God said in 2 Kings chapter 19, 35 and 36. "And it came to pass on a certain night that the angel of the Lord went out and killed the Assyrians, 185,000. And when people rose early in the morning, there were dead bodies everywhere. So Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and went away, returned home, and he remained there." I love those last 4 words, "and he remained there." He didn't come back again. Look out. I can see the hand of God. I would say probably scared to death. So he took off. Question again. Why does God at times expect us to fight our own battles, and other times he fights them for us? I'm sure that each of us can testify to each of those. Why does God prosper some and not others? Why sometimes but not all the time? Well, if you're wondering why, then today's your lucky day, because I've got the answer. I have a 3-word answer, a 4-word answer, and a 7-word answer. The 3-word answer is, I don't know. I really don't know. I'd love to be able to say I do. My 4-word answer is, his greatness is unsearchable. God's greatness is just unsearchable. He's got all the answers. And my 7-word answer is, the secret things belongs to the Lord. Why do things happen? I don't know. Why do some young children die and others live? I don't know why, but God does. God does. You see, our days are numbered. Our days are numbered. Why is it that we search after those things that are not revealed when we don't even understand the things that are revealed? There have been so many times when I've had to let God be God and let him do what he does best, fight the good fight, particularly the ones that I can't. And there are times in our lives when we go, God, I just can't fight any longer. God says, leave it to me. Leave it to me. I will take over. And he does. He does. But I want to tell you, it's not going to deter me from spreading out my concerns before him, simply because he is not answering the way I want him to or the time that I want him to. You know, I've mentioned a guy in Bali in prison. We've been praying for him for 18 years, and we're believing that he's going to get out. We're believing that. Even though life over there is life, you die in prison. But we're believing God will get him out. So I'm going to continually to ask boldly of God for his supernatural intervention in my life every time I come before him, because I know that he is God and he is my greatest interest at heart, your interest at heart. He loves you that much. He never stops thinking about you. Never. Even though there's a few of us here, he never stops thinking about you. Never. That's how much he loved you, because that's why he died on the cross, just simply for you, that your sins may be forgiven and we've got a place in heaven. But I know that there will be times out of God's sheer love for me and his grace for me will fight that battle for me. And I bow before him regardless of the battle that I'm in, just like Hezekiah did, just like Job did. They simply bowed and worshipped God. It's not easy in the battle, but we need to. So what is it today? What is it today that you need to spread before the Lord? What is it for you that you're battling with, or something that you're praying about? I want to just encourage you, write it out. Write it out, which is what I encouraged my son to do this last Friday. Write it out, buddy. Place it before the Lord. So this is what I'm asking, Lord. I'm not demanding of you, God. I'm simply asking. Can you simply say, God, I bring it to you? And name it. Name it. Not that God's got a bad memory, but we need to confess it, speak it out. That's why when people come to me for prayer, I'll say, why are you coming for prayer? Because the speaking out of it is so important. For some, it will mean writing it out and spreading it before him in your secret place of prayer. For others, it may mean having a friend who together you can spread it out before the Lord. Maybe it's about a friend or a family member or a situation at work, and simply saying, God, will you help me deal with this? Will you deal with it? So what is it? I'm going to leave you with that question today. What is it that you're battling with in your own spiritual journey of life that God is saying, well, spread it out before me. Let me work with you.